Hello, everyone. This is part 1 of session 17 of Pre-Socratics to Augustine, also called History of Philosophy 1. We are talking about Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics, and we are still talking about book 1. Today, we want to ask in a quite general way, what is the topic of the Nicomachean ethics? And another way to ask that question is, what kind of ethics is it that Aristotle is laying out in the Nicomachean ethics? The Nicomachean Ethics is an incredibly influential book. It is not just read by people who do the history of philosophy or who study specifically ancient philosophy. Also, a lot of people who are just interested in ethics and who pursue different approaches in ethics turn to the Nicomachean Ethics and find a lot of inspiration in it. Hence, it is an interesting question just to ask, what is quite generally the project of the Nicomachean Ethics, and what type of approach in ethics is it? We saw the claim that happiness, Eudaimonia, or a well-lived human life, is the final good, the ultimate good, the good at which, via several layers of for the sake of relationships, all of our activities aim. So you might pursue some small-scale activity for the sake of some small-scale end. You might go to the grocery store in order to buy spaghetti. But the claim is that ultimately, whatever you do it with a view to your conception of what a well-lived life looks like for you and in general. Now, that is a very ambitious claim, and the way Aristotle approaches it is by kind of repeatedly taking a fresh start and addressing it from several angles. One of the early claims that he makes in book 1 is that we actually all agree that the good is happiness or eudaimonia or the well-lived human life. And here you might ask, really? Given our own reading of the Republic, we might say that is not true. For example, Plato says that the good is the form of the good. And before he lays out that view, Socrates refers to two ideas that he says are quite well known. And one is that pleasure is the good. The other is that wisdom is the good. So presumably there are some people who have different views about the good, who don't say that the good is happiness, but who say something else, such as the good is pleasure, or the good is wisdom, or the good is the form of the good. Now, if we don't want to say that what Aristotle is saying here is simply, not making sense or somehow insincere or something like that, we need to make sense of the idea that in one way or another, we all think that happiness or eudaimonia is the final good. And that might be a candidate for what we discussed earlier, namely that Aristotle thinks that there are some views which we all hold. Now, that need not mean that we all kind of write a treatise about it or explicitly hold these views. Rather, the idea might be that implicitly we hold these views, that if one observes our behavior, then it simply becomes clear that we are committed to this view. And that is what Aristotle seems to assume about this claim that happiness is the final good. The thought is that if you look at how people act, if you look at how they are motivated, that's what transpires. That is what is implicit in how people are motivated. And the way to make sense of this, or to get a sense of what it is that Aristotle is saying here, is you can imagine a kind of question and answer exchange where someone asks someone else, why are you doing what you're doing? So to return to my earlier example of going to the grocery store, suppose someone asks you, why are you going to the grocery store? And you say, to purchase spaghetti. And then the other person says, why do you want to buy spaghetti? And then you say, in order to cook dinner. And then the other person says, why do you want to cook dinner? And then you say, well, I'm hosting friends. And then the other person says, why do you want to host friends? And then you say, well, I like them. I like spending time with them. And they are my friends. And then the other person says, well, but why do you want to have friends? And then at that point, you would say, well, friendship just is something that belongs to my conception of what a good life looks like. And the claim is that every chain of why questions, why are you doing this, would end the same way. Whatever it is that you do, ultimately you would have to appeal to your conception of a well-lived human life and how what you're doing relates to it. And that is the way in which you and all of us would be committed to the view that happiness or eudaimonia is the good. So here's your assignment for today. Because that is the big and main claim that Aristotle wants to defend and lay out and develop, he begins his ethics by saying, this is the claim. Happiness is the final end. Like whatever we do, ultimately we are motivated by seeking happiness or eudaimonia. But if that is true, if happiness is the final end, then we really need to know what it is. And unfortunately, even though we all agree in this kind of implicit way that I have sketched, that happiness is the final end, we all disagree on what it actually looks like. Because some of us, imagine that happiness is to be, to go out and party every night, and others imagine other things. But we need to find out what happiness really is like. Because if it is really the final end for us, then we need to know what it consists of. And hence the project of Aristotle's ethics is to find out what a good human life, a well-lived human life, a happy human life actually looks like. That is the project of the Nicomachean ethics, and it is delineated in the first couple of chapters of Book 1 as a distinctive project in ethics. And your assignment is to try and just think about what kind of ethics that is and how it compares to other ways in which you can think of ethics and to other central questions that you can imagine someone else might pursue in ethics.